Yes, welcome back. This is A RAP CRITIC. I'm your boy Malik 16. And no, I don't plan on retiring anytime soon. But if any of you have plans or have already gone to any of the farewell concerts by Scarface in his last year before he retires, let me know how it was. Let me know what kind of experience you had. And it'd be a great opportunity for you to rock one of these I Used to Love Her tees and show how much hip-hop is a part of your life. And you can find those on the Rap Ruler, where you could also go leave your scores and rankings for this particular album that we're going over today. And we're talking about none other than Scarface's 1997 classic, turning 25 this year, the Untouchable. And now this is the category 2 section where we go over the rap performance on this album. With no further ado, let's jump right into it. The first dimension that we're talking about in category 2 is going to be dimension 1, personality and charisma. Now, we talked about Scarface opening this album with some of this gangster feel and giving a nod to the fact that his name comes from Al Capone and the movie The Untouchables, and Scarface also being a nod to the Tony Montana character. Never does Scarface go into the extremes of assuming that character on this album. He's done it on previous projects and albums, but he's now reached the status of being a boss in his own right. And so that's what you're hearing throughout this album. I'm a boss in this rap world, I'm a boss in the street world, in this Texas world, this Houston 5th Ward world, and that's what I'm bringing across. And so that is the dominant personality, which is a mix of Scarface's actual personality and this persona that he's created. So you get the Brad Jordan and the Scarface, and he's very aware of it. And in that, there are moments of emotional inflection on different songs where he wants you to feel what he's taking you through. So on the first few songs, you're gonna get the aggressor, right? And then on the more substantive songs, you are going to get more of this inward kind of feel and more of this preacher and reflective feel. And so that's the tone of personality you get. But there's an uncle quality. You know, I say this often about Southern rappers because I think it comes with just conventional Southern wisdom, having this old soul feel too. So you could be saying lots of young words, but the way you are putting them across has this I'm beyond my years feeling. The personality lives in the words he chooses and how he puts them together. And we'll talk about all of this as we go on in dimensions. I don't know how much that lends itself to a charisma factor, but there's definitely a personality there. It's all something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Takes us to dimension 2, the overall believability or the suspension of disbelief. So we talked about this idea of Brad Jordan meets the Scarface persona. Since we're only talking about this album, I mentioned that the nod to the gangster imagery from mob movies is only accented. It's only a nod. He's mostly talking about his presence as himself in the streets and in the game. And he's now equated himself to those. He no longer has to reenact Scarface movie scenes. He's telling you scenes from his own life, if you dare to believe that. Those of you who have read Scarface's autobiography, The Diary of a Madman by Brad Jordan, might be more familiar than some with his description of elements of his life that factored into him being the way he depicts himself in his music, right? So he describes being this troubled child from a young age. For one, he describes using drugs since 8 years old under the influence of his uncles. And when we say drugs, we mean drugs. So everything from huffing, which is inhaling, products like paint, to psychedelics and cocaine later in life, and lean, of course, because it's Texas. And so you factor that in, and then he talks about being a really troubled adolescent who was in different institutions, in and out, and by the time he's this older teenager, young man, right before joining the Ghetto Boys, he's wild in the streets. And he says pretty much on the track here, he alludes to starting in 86. I think that's at the end of For Real, where he talks about the game changing since he started in 86, and he talked about reaching kind of the peak of it in 1988, right before joining the Ghetto Boys. And he descriptively refers to that period and his activity as being wild. So much so that at points he doesn't want to describe it as much. But there's also a darkness that he speaks to, and I mentioned that darkness being absent on this album, which used to be his forte, speaking more about morbidity and death and demons and things like that. Doesn't really play in that territory in this album. It's more street oriented, and so even if it's 2 years of being wild, was he OG level at that point? Probably not. But was he doing enough of the things that he's talking about in these songs to be as descriptive as he is? Because if you listen to a song like For Real, the drug dealing description that he gets into lets you know he's no stranger to it, right? When he's saying, you know, I gave this guy 36 and he only brought me back 20 ounces. I got this in a pot and I'm pulling it out with a hanger. Very descriptive. You know that he was among it at some point in his life. Why he's choosing to characterize it in a present tense, it's always, you know, a creative decision that rappers seem to make, and this is what leaves it in your hands with how much you believe it. This is 1997. He's a well-known rapper, damn sure well-known enough in Texas to not be actively, but believability. So something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats, because when he gets to songs like Faith, he's definitely speaking as the man Brad Jordan. And songs like Southside, he's telling you some of this troubled history where, like, he's got beef with the vice principal who told his mother about his cocaine case, and he's not going back to school because he's got his sights set on the streets. You're getting these elements where he's telling you this is what I lived through, and it becomes a little hard to separate it from songs like For Real, Your Money or Your Life, where he's saying, I will do this, I'm going to actively pursue this murder because of this drug deal. Takes us to dimension 3, the delivery and the use of voice. Scarface has been brought up on his channel a bunch of times in reference to what has become the more recognized go-to flow for him, where his voice rises and descends, and it's in this kind of preacher delivery. But on this album, there's a lot more projection than that older iteration of Scarface that I think the second wave of his listeners came to know. So he's definitely coming from a throat voice on this album. You know, more of the songs are having that, now as I open up the, you know, and then he'll play with it in ways like on the title track where he says, test my steel to the chest size still. He's tapping into his Chuck D kind of influence, which he's pointed out as being leaving a big impression on him in his early days. Same thing with Ice Cube. His signature is projection. And so Scarface does a lot of that, but then he decides on other songs, especially the softer songs, to tone it down and use more of his inside voice. And you hear that, and it gives this diversity of delivery for different songs, showing you that he has a range. And I mentioned that uncle element because with the southern accent and with that preacher tone, it gives the feel that Scarface is older than he was. And those songs where he's projecting more remind you, oh no, this is still a young man. You know, he's still in his 20s, letting you know that he's still got the vitality. The timing is always in pocket. Every now and then he'll pick up, and then there's manipulation of the voice where he pans and does what I call the Slick Rick effect with some of his lines, where he's doing them in a way where he's kind of answering for himself. Mary Jane's sequence is all like that. When the world starts to stress you out, what you do? Put a cancer stick up in your mouth or grab a brew. He's answering, he's finishing the thoughts in another voice, but it's still his voice. And so you'll hear that on different verses on Faith, the second verse in particular, he's doing a lot of that. And then it gets more intricate. You'll hear it also on Smile, to the point where some of the words don't even completely form. They kind of just cut off because he's doing it with this emotion and in that up and down thing. So, have you ever seen it? Who was deep in the game? Overlooking this tomorrow, so they finally came. When I focus on reality, we broken and changed. So add an emphasis on certain words for effect, for dramatic effect. That's that preacher style. And we'll talk more about that in the next dimension. This is all something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Dimension 4, the flow. All right, this is where you have it. And so, Scarface is no stranger to flow. He's been noted as saying that he always goes in with intentions to have different flows throughout the album. He never wants to be accused of rapping the same way. I think lazy listeners might feel like Scarface raps the same way, but there's different patterns when he wants to, and they get more intricate depending on the amount of effort and the focus and direction of a song. And so we take a song like No Warning, where it seems like there's no direction at all. That's where you're getting a default Scarface. But you take a song like Your Money or Your Life, and he's doing this whole sequence in the first verse where he's starting with a syllable sound and then following that up with packed syllables until he gets to that syllable sound again. And so I'll put that verse up so you can see it. So he's like, I'm rapping, and I'm mapping. So there's a musicality in the way he's making the words fall against that beat. And that's the kind of deliberate stuff you'll see. Like I pointed out on Mary Jane, where he's choosing to do that whole verse as if he's answering himself. And it all stays in the same sequence. Each verse is structured that way. And then you get Faith, where it's probably the biggest display of multi-syllabalism on the whole album. Scarface is in this flow bag on this song Faith, where he's going and packing intricate structures, going into a regular calmer structure, coming back to an intricate structure, and then he even incorporates that whole answer self, conclude the thought with an ad-lib kind of pattern. And so he really was trying to do something musically with that song. And then he even does this thing where he pauses to end his final verse. And he goes, wait, and lets the music take it out until it comes back up after that little break. And it's not just a music break, it's a thought break. So everything intentional on that song. In between that, you're getting different things. Money Makes the World Go Round, it just sounds like he's talking. He's using a really calm, fact of the matter kind of pattern. The comfort level that he rides the Southside track with is also a nice break from the way that he approached the two songs before it and the two songs afterwards. Sunshine and For Real kind of have the same setup. The only difference with For Real is that he makes sure he ends the first and the second verses with the same refrain. He says the same lines to end out. When we're also factoring in the flows that the guests use, Tupac is almost at his lyrical best on both of his two verses. So comfortable and doing things that we hadn't heard Tupac do. And then Dre's fluidity on his verses. It'd be interesting to know who wrote his verses at that point. And Devin, we talked in video 1 about his decision to intertwine some of his singing, which is his signature. It's you expect Devin to sing and rap on a song, and he did it so seamlessly on here, flow-wise. So all things to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats takes us to Dimension 5, wordplay and bar intent. Wordplay when it comes to Scarface is always going to come down to word selection. It's the words that he chooses. It's the imagery. Imagery is Scarface's bread and butter. That's becoming the term I use a lot on this channel, right up there with nuance. But it's what he does best. He's going to paint a picture, a vivid description, even on those violent songs. And we'll talk more about this in the next dimension. So Scarface was really big on what he calls come lines, which is an emphasis on how you start a verse, the first opening words, the first opening sentence. This is something I thought only I made a big deal about, but just thinking about the mind of grown men when they sit down and craft these songs they make, and what they think, what goes through their head, and what they finalize on, like, oh, this was a good idea to start this way. Sometimes rappers come out really abrupt as a lead-off, sometimes it's really a setup, the first couple lines, sometimes it's really prolific words, and it seemed like Scarface was leaning more towards the prolific end of things, because in his mind, he's crafting all of his songs with the idea that a come line is what grabs you in. You're not gonna get a lot of metaphor or simile at all. You're not gonna get all of these trippy-dippy, clever uses of rhetorical devices. There's no alliteration and, conceit here. There is straightforwardness, and then you get moments of clever lines, like on Your Money on Your Life, he has a line where he says something to the effect of, I leave you shipwrecked in the desert dry with your ish wet. And then shortly after that, he does the sequence of homonyms where he's like, I leave you with a F you know, the F you wrote, something with the F you thought. That is the pinnacle. That is the height of wordplay that you're gonna get from Scarface here. Everything else is pretty much straightforward. If you pick up on any other devices or pieces of wordplay on this album, please leave it in the comments. Let that influence your rankings as you're considering this on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Takes us to Dimension 6. Couldn't wait to get to this. This is the punchlines, poetic wisdom, and overall quotability. I have repeatedly used Scarface as the exemplar of poetic wisdom as the alternative to punchline rappers. So it all comes down to the same thing. They're both rap levels that prompt a memorable quality, that prompt a rewind factor. So if you're not rewinding to hear the, oh, did he just say that? Or, oh, that was funny and that's crazy. It's, oh, those are words to live by. That's a quote. I can put that on a shirt. I can put that on a meme. And Scarface is chock full of those. So he does dabble in punchline territory maybe 1, 2, or 3 times on this album. There's a line on No Warning where he's like, coming with game that even Bo don't know, or something like that. And that's it when it comes. You are not coming to a Scarface album for punchlines. But poetic wisdom bleeds all throughout, even in his songs that are textured with violence. It's the way that he describes violence that is a part of the mythos of Scarface. And so I'm gonna post up the second verse from Sunshine, because he takes a deviation from first person. The first and third verse, he's shifting in and out of first and second person, talking about what he's doing to prepare to get this enemy, to get this op, what he's going to do to you, the op. The second verse, he takes a decidedly third person approach, takes himself out of the narrative for a second, and describes what is going on. So he's describing the mother's reaction, how it got to this point, how violence is very American, and it's indicated by him mentioning Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, and saying that he went to Washington, D.C. and still there's no karma. And then he goes back to talking about the streets and violence on the streets and how it all plays out. So he gets descriptive as if he's taking himself out the picture just to come back in. And that whole verse reads as poetry. And there's other songs where he does that too. And that is why people really, really celebrate Scarface, because it's not just another rapper, reveling in ignorance. Is that he's able to take an ignorant topic and give it this depth of poetry and poetic description. And so you can do that same thing with the entirety of the song Faith. Faith, I can print that out right now and take it to a poetry reading anywhere. And this question of how people confront temptation, how people deal with existential crises, and just his ending bars on there, what he said, how can we just float in space, spinning in place without extending ourselves in faith? Wait, what? Those are the things, right? And there's several passages from this album that read like that, even in their most ridiculous. I really think Devin the Dude's poetic wisdom that he added to Money Makes the World Go Round he probably had the deepest verse on there, because Daz and Scarface approach it casually, and KB, the last guest, approaches from a place of desperation. He's another rapper that sacrifices cleverness for him wanting you to feel what he's feeling and trying to get across there. I almost feel like KB went and did what he said he was going to do after that verse. Even from Tupac with the imagery, that's where Scarface's wordplay lies. So it's something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Takes us to Dimension 7, Concepts. No, this is not a concept album, so we can eliminate that and go right into the question of, are there concept songs here? Mary Jane, absolutely a concept song. Not an unfamiliar concept, but interestingly enough, the first time that this concept and an approach has been put to the marijuana conversation. So he's borrowing a page out of Common's book and personifying that plant as a woman and talking to it not only as a woman but as his relief. So he's talking about it and to it at the same time, while he's doing that structural thing that we mentioned in the other dimensions, where he's concluding his own thought. The whole song is a very meta song, and a lot of people have embraced it as a smoker's anthem, but what he is saying in the commentary that he's making is beyond. It's layered. He's talking about the drugs that actually kill people and kill people at high rates, and what's being done about it, and who it benefits and who it doesn't benefits, right? If it's taxable, then it's cool. Kill or not, he's saying all of these lines. Never saw the things we seen in Speed, never made me crash my whip. He's talking about all the benefits that he gets from this plant and how villainized and demonized it is, and what it's used for, and how he's seen it used, and comparing it to other things, while still talking to it and about it as if it's this woman, Mary Jane, only driven home by having the female background vocalist singing the hook, Mary, 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 Mary. Concept song to a T. Do we get anything touching that level? Faith and Smile are loosely conceptual, but I don't think they dabble in any abstraction that requires you to conceptualize, unless you really are getting into this deep meditative state about what it means to smile through all the pain, or what it means to have a relationship with a higher being and wonder what your purpose in life is. But for the most part, you get what you get out of those songs, or those songs were intended to say what they said. No extra step required. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Takes us to the content dimensions. Yes, dimension 8, the externalized content. How much is Scarface talking about that is worldly, that's the goings on around him? We have Mary Jane, even though he's talking about how he benefits, he's making a commentary overall. We have Smarts, which is a whole diatribe, is a rant, it's a manifesto about racism, structural racism, and white supremacy, and using kind of this fight fire with fire at those to combat it. Like, hey, let's be racist back, let's get our own stuff and stop relying on systems that have been in place that have held black people down forever. So whether you buy into that belief or not, he then takes it up a notch at the end by framing it as this spiritual war, this tug of war between demonic forces and higher forces, and telling you what he'll be down for if it happens. And until then, he's trying to galvanize and encourage it to happen, but he hopes that y'all wisen up first. He knows it can't happen until his people get a little smarter. So Really, really interesting commentary. Money makes the world go round again. When Scarface is not talking about his own life, which he's not doing a lot of on this album, except for songs like Southside, he is really making social commentary on the way things work in the world. A very, very observer standpoint. Money makes the world go round. These are all the things that money allows us to do. Everybody on that track does it the same. It's one of those great moments where you do a posse cut hoping that everybody stays on topic, and they do. And so everybody is telling you what personally money does for them, but also what they see money do for others. It's casually deep. Smile is the same way. Tupac and Scarface are commenting on the world, but they're also talking about the world from their experience, all the setbacks, the trip ups, the mistakes, the pain, and how to still hold your head up through the pain. And Scarface involves prayer in that song, and you're getting that. So this is where we start talking about Dimension 9, which is the internalized content, the inner monologue, the introspection, the reflective moments. You get that all throughout the album. Even on songs like For Real, where Scarface is talking about someone playing with my money, they got to get got. He's telling you his whole outlook on it. By the time you get to that third verse where he's talking about the game changed, and this is what it used to be like for me on these streets, and here's what I will tolerate, here's what I won't, here's why it bothers me. He's letting you know the thoughts. He told you, I haven't been this paranoid since I sold dope. Even on the songs where he's talking about loading up the guns and getting some action, he's telling you what he's thinking there. So those may not be the deepest, but as I mentioned on songs like Southside, where he's giving you a glimpse of his younger life and the decisions he made, you're starting to get that autobiographical stuff. Faith and Smile, he's really talking about moments where he was slipping into that blackness, and he's alluding. He's not outright speaking on his suicide attempts, but he's going back to when he had those thoughts, what he did, where he ended up, and the visions he saw. He's like, I know the devil's coming to take me, and he's questioning why he had those visions in the first place, and he's attributing it all to having faith. Those are really powerful moments of reflection, and this is all something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats for both dimensions, 8 and 9, external and internal. And that takes us to the final dimension, dimension 10, storytelling. Another reason why Scarface is heralded as one of the greatest to ever do it is his storytelling ability. This is something that we touched on when we reviewed the Ghetto Boys album. Scarface was in cinematic storytelling mode even back then, at the end of the 80s going into the 90s, and his contributions to hip-hop have been some of the most script-ready readouts and displays of creativity. So even when he's exaggerating street life and gangsterism, there's storytelling in almost every verse. The more direct stories are going to be For Real, Your Money or Your Life. Those are stories where he's telling you the why, the how, the when, and the what. A lot of the other songs don't give you all of those elements. They give you some of them, but there is at least one storytelling verse on most of the songs on here. And how strong those are, always up to you, but this is all something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Scarface is definitely a student of the old school ideology that you are not a good rapper unless you can tell a good story. And with that, I bring you the conclusion of our Category 2 review of the rap performance on this album. Like and subscribe. Y'all know what it is. Until next time, F a Rap Critic. They talk about it while I live it. That's word to meth.